In December of 1963, here in North Fork, California, a man, his wife, and his son would come to visit their grandparents for Christmas. Now, the man would then sit the grandparents down and say, I need my son to live here with you. He's just not working out too well with my new wife. He's scaring her. So I need you to take over for me. Now that little boy would become known as the co-ed killer, Edmund Kemper.
In 1972 and 1973, a series of murders shocked Northern California. College girls began to disappear while hitchhiking.
You were able to appear like an ordinary person, non-threatening to...
I lived as an ordinary person most of my life, even though I was living a parallel, increasingly sick life, other life.
Ed was 15 at the time of him moving in with his grandparents. Now, they owned a ranch here in North Fork. Now, it's kind of impossible to find the location of the ranch. We got what road it was on and that it was 2 miles west of the town, but that's pretty much it. So we brought you here to the cemetery where his grandparents' graves are. Now, their deaths are significant to his story because they were his first 2 victims. When Ed was talking about his grandfather, he referred to him as a senile old man. Now, he said about his grandmother that she was a ballsy old woman that always tried to emasculate him and his granddad, and it reminded him a lot of his actual mother. So the hatred he had for his mom, he kind of fueled into his grandmother. She was very strict with him. He said he felt like he was living in a jail and she was his warden, basically, because she wouldn't let him participate in any kind of social activities, wouldn't let him have friends over, monitored what he watched, wouldn't let him watch cartoons. The granddad actually gifted Ed a .22, and he used the .22 to kill a lot of small animals.
You gotta get that practice in.
It was his way to filter his rage, basically. Now, the grandmother thought it was senseless, like him killing all these little animals, so she made Granddad take the gun from him, and that made him hate her even more. On August 27th, 1964, now this is less than a year Ed has been living with the grandparents. Granddad went off to town to run some errands, pick up some groceries. So Grandma has already started getting suspicious of Ed because he started giving these hateful looks to her. She already thinks he's plotting something against her. But she's there along with him. She's sitting at the kitchen table writing a children's book. Now, they get into an argument over the fact that he's cutting these hateful glares at her again. And he goes and he gets the .22 that was taken away from him. And he goes outside on the porch to grab his dog because they're going to go hunt and kill some stuff. When the grandmother is like, oh, and don't you be shooting them birds anymore. And that was the last straw. Ed turned around through the screen and shot her in the back of the head and 2 more times, I believe, in the back. Now, it stated he went in, he covered her head with a towel, drug her to the bedroom, and stabbed her a few more times with a kitchen knife. Now, I think it was about 20 to 30 minutes later, Granddad comes home. And Granddad greets him with a smile and turns around to start unloading the stuff that he had went to get from town. And Ed points the gun at the back of the Granddad's head and pulls the trigger and kills Granddad instantly. Now, it was stated he did that because he didn't want him to see her, because they had been married for like 50 years. And he's like, I don't want him to see his wife dead, so I shot him. And then he drug his body to the garage after that. And it was stated that that was the only person that they think that Ed Kemper actually ever loved was his granddad. Yeah. And that he respected him. But yeah, he ended both their lives that day, and they ended up being his first two victims. He really didn't know what to do. I mean, he's 15. He called his mama, and his mama's like, I'm calling the cops. So cops came and picked Ed up, and he ends up going away, to like a psych hospital, because he reported when the police got there, he just wanted to see what it would be like to shoot his grandma. That's what he told them. And he goes away for 5 years, and at 21, he is released back out into the wild, I guess you would say. They're buried here in the cemetery at North Fork, right over here. It was a very simple grave. Kemper, Edmund, and Maud. In the 1960s, Santa Cruz was a quiet little beach town, one that you came to retire. But then they went around and messed around and they put a school here. So what do you think happened? All the young people started flocking here. And you started having all these people come up from San Francisco, basically the hippies, they called them, forming communes. And young girls loved it, so they flocked here. Now, in 1969, at the end of 1969, I might add, Ed Kemper gets released from the state hospital. Now, keep in mind, during those years he was there, he basically was like this with the doctors. Like to the point where he was able to look into files and learn things and learn tests and how to basically answer things, how doctors wanted them answered to be diagnosed with certain things. He was a smart man.
Yeah, pretty high.
So he gets out, he comes here, because they don't want him to get released to his mom, but unfortunately that is what happens. He comes here to live with his mom. And he starts practicing, so to speak, picking up hitchhikers. Pretty much I read that he picked up about 150 of them from here, pretty much all over California. And what he was doing was learning things, watching them, basically waiting until the time where he thought he grew up enough nerve to actually carry out the plans that he wanted to. Now, Ed and his mama did not have a good relationship, because when he was younger, she was pretty mean to him. She locked him in the basement for long periods of time because she thought that he was going to do stuff to his sisters. At a young age, Ed was killing the family cat. He buried one alive, and then he undug it and decapitated it and put its head on a stick. Later on, he killed another one, dismembered it, hid pieces in the closet. He would take his little sister's Barbie dolls and decapitate them. There's a lot of things wrong with his childhood, pointing to where he eventually led in his adult life. During the time when Ed Kemper was here in Santa Cruz, during those couple of years where he went on his killing spree, there was also 2 other serial killers here. Now together, in that short amount of time, they would rack up a body count of like 25 people. And needless to say, Santa Cruz was dubbed the murder capital of the world. Now, you might remember that saying from a particular movie that was filmed here. One that featured that over there. Now, if you remember, Lost Boys was filmed here, featuring this that you're looking at. And when Michael is coming into the town and they pass the billboard, looks back, and behind the billboard is written, murder capital of the world. It's funny just to think that it was actually named that for a legitimate purpose, not a clan of vampires taking over Santa Cruz or Santa Carla. Within a few years, Ed had saved up enough money to where he was able to move out from his mom's house. Now, he moves here to Alameda, California, which is about an hour from Santa Cruz. Now, he still didn't really feel like he got out from under her thumb. Like, she was always calling and she'd show up for visits and stuff like that. So Claire Nell was determined to keep that animosity going between the 2 of them.
My mother was a sick, angry, hungry, and very sad woman. I hated her.
Now, I told you that he had picked up hitchhikers, multiple hitchhikers, to kind of like practice and learn how to approach women. Well, in May of 1972, that's when he felt ready. And he was driving around and saw 2 women walking near the Berkeley campus. Now, those 2 women were Mary Ann Pesh and Anita Lucchesa. So both of them climb in the car with him. It ain't no thing. He drives them to a secluded, wooded area where he makes Anita get into the trunk of the car. While she's in the trunk, he strangles and stabs Mary Ann, and then ultimately does the same thing to Anita. He puts both their bodies into the trunk, and he starts making his way back to his apartment here in Alameda. Now, on the way back to the apartment, he's actually stopped by a cop for a taillight broken. And the cop doesn't realize, there's 2 dead bodies in the trunk of this dude's car. He makes it back to the apartment where he's sharing this place with a roommate, but he's not here. And he brings their bodies up, has sexual intercourse with them, dismembers them, and later on disposes of the parts. Now, the only thing they ever found of the 2 girls was Mary Ann's skull. That's it. Nothing else was ever found. In September of that same year, he would find another girl walking by the name of Aku Aku. Now, she was a dancer and she was on her way to dance class. But she opted out of taking the bus and decided to hitchhike, and Ed come along and picked her up. He, just like the other one, took her to a secluded area. Now, the thing with her, he actually locked himself out of the vehicle with her. And she, I guess, didn't realize that the gun was in the car with her. She ends up unlocking the door and letting him back in. And ultimately, she kind of gets the same fate as the other 2. She gets killed, brought back to his apartment, dismembered, and pieces were disposed of. Now, this was the location of his apartment building. I don't know exactly which apartment was his, but yeah, this is where he would have brought these 3 back and dismembered them somewhere in this building right here in front of you. Nice place.
Yeah, nice place.
Nice neighborhood.
So we're here inside the jury room where Kemper would frequent. Now, this is the new jury room. It's still the same bar, but it's no longer a cop bar. And so he would frequent here and talk to the cops, and he would sit on this end right here is where he normally would belly up to the bar, so to speak. They said this hasn't been a cop bar in a long time. They said he was here most days talking to the cops, trying to stay in the know and make sure they weren't kind of catching on to what he had been doing, kind of pick up tips and tricks for not getting caught.
They'd buy me a beer, I'd buy them a beer. Casual relationships, but I was poking around a little bit trying to find some things out. I knew they wouldn't be privy to hot information, but there were some things that were bothering me, like were there any speculations on how they were dying?
Did the cops like you?
Like I said, a friendly nuisance. I got in the way, and it was deliberate. Again, friendly nuisances are dismissed.
So this would have been where Kemper sat, right here, second to the end. Belly up to the bar and get friendly with the cops.
By January of 1973, Ed had officially moved back in with Mom here in Santa Cruz. Now, it's at Mom's house that he would dismember 3 of his victims and commit 2 other murders in the home. Now, in January, he got Cindy Shaw, picked her up, drove her to a wooded area, fatally shot her. Now, he would bring the body back to Mom's house, hide her body in a closet until Mom went to work the next morning. Then he got the body out, decapitated her, had oral sex with the decapitated head, and dismembered her body and got rid of it. Now, a month later, him and his mom get in a fight. He's like, I need to let this aggression out. He leaves. He goes and finds 2 more victims by the name of Rosaline Thorpe and Allison Liu. Now, these 2, he shot both of them in the head, covered their bodies with blankets, brought them back here to this house you see over here in front of you, and did the same thing ultimately.
Why did you actually kill the girls?
My frustration, my inability to communicate socially, sexually. I wasn't impotent, but emotionally I was impotent. I was scared to death of failing in male-female relationships. I knew absolutely nothing about that whole area, even if just sitting down and talking with a young lady. I need to be able to really communicate, and ironically enough, that's why I began picking people up. And I'm picking up young women, and I'm going a little bit farther each time. It's a daring kind of a thing. At first there wasn't a gun. I'm driving along. We go to a vulnerable place where there aren't people watching, where I could act out, and I say, no, I can't. And then a gun is in the car, hidden. And this craving, this awful, raging, eating feeling inside. I could feel it consuming my insides, this fantastic passion. It was overwhelming me.
Now, it was also here in April that him and his mom would get into a fight. And the mom was like, "What do you want to do, stay up here and talk all night?" He's like, "No, good night." And comes back later while she's asleep with a claw hammer, bludgeons her in the head, slits her throat, decapitates her, and sits her head up on like a shelf. And he proceeds to scream at her for an hour, the head, and then plays darts with it.
You stupid.
And after he does all of this, he takes her larynx out and her tongue, and he tries to put it down the disposal. The disposal can't handle it, so it spits it back up.
Naturally.
And he's like, "Well, that's fitting because of all the bitching and screaming she did at me throughout the years."
I knew a week before she died I was going to kill her. And she went out to a party, she got soused, she came home, went to sleep. I was woken up by that. Came out. I walked up to her bed. She's laying there reading a paperback, as many thousands of nights before. And she said, "Oh, I suppose you're going to want to sit up all night and talk now." Shit. And I looked at her, I said, "No." I said, "Good night." And I knew I was going to kill her, you know? And it's so cold, it's so hard. A 6 young woman dead because of the way she raises her son and the way her son is raised, the way he grows up. And what's her closing words? "I suppose you want to sit up all night and talk." God, I wish I had.
After that, he leaves. Well, he finishes bashing her head in. He leaves to go to a bar to go drink. Comes back home, calls one of her friends over, and then proceeds to kill her friend. Now, after this, he writes a note to the cops, and he gets in his car, and he drives straight, like 1,000 miles, no brakes, all the way to Colorado. He gets on a payphone in Colorado, and he calls the cops. The cops do not believe him. They're like, "Whatever, call back in a couple of hours." So he calls back in a couple of hours, and he asks to speak to a cop he does know. And he tells him, "You need to go over here because I've committed these 2 murders."
Right.
And he sits there and he waits on them to come pick him up. So they arrest him, and whenever they arrest him, he confesses. He is the co-ed killer, and he's killed 6 other women.
Didn't Kemper stop himself toward the end of his career?
Kemper says he did. He says he could have gone on. He said he had fantasies of killing dozens more people, of leaving a trail of bodies across the country, and at one point he just got on the telephone and turned himself in. He said it was time for the killing to stop. In his case, he said publicly that it was his mother that he was killing all along, and when he killed his mother, that was the end. It's a very deep psychological observation from himself. It may be very accurate.
Why did you wind up giving yourself up?
It had to stop. It had to stop. Once my mother was dead, there was almost a cathartic process at that point. I got physically ill right then, when she died, when I murdered her. And once she was dead, there was no way I could back out.
His mom would have had a garden. I don't know if it was in the back of the house or the front of the house. But when he brought Cindy Shaw here and he decapitated her, basically he held onto her head for a few days, and he continued to have sexual intercourse with it. Now, he would eventually bury her head in his mom's garden, facing up toward his mom's window, because he said that his mama always liked people looking up to her. I mean, it's crazy that it's still here. Like, the people that live here have to know, because I'm sure they get people that come by here all the time.
It's a duplex. A is on the bottom and B is on the top.
There's A on the bottom. There's the door that goes in. Another thing with Cindy Shaw, once he dismembered her and disposed of the body, you know, I told you the head's back here, was back here. But when he disposed of the other dismembered body parts, eventually these body parts started getting found. And basically they were able to piece her back together. And they determined that
Like
she was dismembered with like a power saw or something.
I mean, yeah, because they ain't too much gonna cut through that bone, with the exception of like a chainsaw or like maybe a skill saw, and like you put it up on, but then you had to put it up on the table and like a table saw.
Yeah. Now, I would really love to know inside that house if they actually took the tub out, because that's where I read that he would take them, was the tub, to do all the dismembering. So at least if the house is still standing, I really hope that's one thing they did change out, would be the bathtub.
I mean, that would be like the first thing I changed out. Hey, sir, what would you like to remodel first? The bathtub. Let's start there and work our way out.
Ed went to court for the murders that he confessed to, and he got sentenced to prison without the option of parole. And currently, Ed Kemper is still there. He is still alive in his 70s in prison.
Well, that does it for this video. Hope you enjoyed it as much as we enjoyed making it. And shout out to our VIP Road Warrior patron, the Crip Lady. Thanks for your support each month. Greatly appreciate it. Thank you for watching this video. And we'll catch you down the road at the next exit.
Keep it spooky.
Later.